Hello and welcome back to Building Momentum, the show where we peel back the curtain on exciting and often chaotic world of building a successful SaaS business. I'm Yash, your host for this show, where every episode we bring you the stories and strategies of founders who've been in the trenches, conquering churn, scaling their teams, and building products that people and businesses love. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Philip Werner, founder and CEO at Maekersuite.com. They're a powerful platform that can help you craft compelling video storylines using data and AI. And we're excited to hear their story and the lessons they've learned along the way. We'll be dissecting the wins, the losses, and everything in between. So buckle up, grab your headphones, and get ready to dive into the world of SaaS founders. Hey, Philip, how are you doing today?
Hey Ash, thank you. I'm well. It's sunny here and it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Philip, for joining in. And I want to start by understanding a little bit around what is Makersuite. Why did you start building it? Give us a little bit of an introduction, like the first few months of starting and building Makersuite.
Yeah, so the reason why we're building Makersuite, goes back for probably my whole life. I grew up in a family of filmmakers, and I was
Mhm,
exposed to storytelling and
mhm,
video creation or filmmaking from very early on in my life.
mhm,
And after business school, where I went to for 5 years, and then starting my career working for a film production company, and then also running my own video production company and social media
mhm,
agency for 6 years, it seemed a very natural evolution
mhm,
to productize what I learned
mhm,
the decade before, and that's how the idea for Makersuite came about. And what we're doing with Makersuite is essentially we are trying to bring data and storytelling together. So we
mhm,
want to analyze content. We want to figure out what works, what makes content and storytelling engaging, and then we want to feed this information into the creation process for anyone who wants to create a video, essentially, right? Obviously
mhm,
at the moment there's lots of creators and freelancers and agencies using our
mhm,
product, but there is going to be in the future SMEs, maybe
mhm.
enterprises also going to use the products. Yeah, we're building Makersuite simply because it's an evolution of years and years of experience and gathering experience, and then experiencing the problems that video
Mhm,
creation has, and then
mhm.
coming up with an idea and a product that tries to solve these problems.
Awesome, and thank you for sharing that. It's I cannot tell you. I'm in the business of talking to founders who started SaaS products, and I cannot tell you how often this happens. This story happens, right? Which is where the founder has been an expert in an industry, has identified a problem, and then sort of decides at some point that I'm going to fix this problem, and builds out a product that then other people also sort of start using and love, right? And so the next thing that I want to understand from you is there are different journeys of founders to starting a business, and some of them could be running a services business and then starting to building a product. Other people directly right out of the gate, just finish their education, a couple of years of employment, and then start building a product for themselves. In almost all of those journeys, accelerators and incubators um, sort of play an important and crucial role in the early formative years of a startup. You've been a part of an accelerator, and so can you talk to us a little bit about what that experience was, how that was helpful in formative years of Makers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I just mentioned before, right? I my previous company, I was running an agency and production company,
Yeah.
and it was a service company. So we were selling to big clients, big automotive customers, fashion
Hmm.
brands, and food brands. And everything was done manually, right? We had a big
Yeah.
team, and it was all dependent on our own creativity. And when we decided that we wanted to discontinue the business, simply because my co-founder and I wanted to do something else with our lives, I talked to my network and my friends, and one friend told me that if you're not yet 100% sure what the exact ideas that you want to work on,
Hmm.
why don't you join Antler? Antler is a globally operating VC. I joined them in London. And I then met other people, exchanged ideas, and then obviously we pitched the idea to the investment committee, and we had 3 months to basically start developing the first concept, doing first user research, and Entler helped a lot during that phase, right? They introduced us to people who have already built successful companies. They have introduced us to angel investors. They introduced us to experts in specific areas, whether it's marketing or product or tech. And we got a lot of exposure to a really, really big network of very experienced operators and investors. Which tremendously helped us to stay on track, you know, and not waste a lot of time, but always ask the right questions. And it was tremendously helpful. And especially because with the Maekersuite, I'm a first-time tech founder, right? I wouldn't, I would always do it with an incubator like Entler again. If you have built one or two or three successful companies, then maybe an incubator or accelerator is not as important anymore, because you've built your own network, you know people, you have access to maybe a couple of investors, and then it's maybe not important, and then the percentage that you have to give away for the investment that you get is maybe a little bit too much. But in our case, I'm very thankful to this day that I had the opportunity to be part of the London cohort, and then also to get the investment from them.
Yeah, and so one of the ways that we look at accelerators and incubators is that they help founders reduce their cost of learning. Right? That they put you in touch with the people who will be able to either help you, ask you questions, or answer some of the questions that you have, which will basically shorten the cycle or the amount of time that you need to spend to get to the next whatever the next milestone is, right? And if you've already done a couple of these successful businesses before, that's where the learning has already happened, right? And that's an absolute fair point. So one of the things that you also mentioned is that you've raised external capital, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's about $1 million US dollars. So talk to us a little about that. Like there's always a conversation in the SaaS community between bootstrapping a SaaS company versus raising capital. So why did you go pick the route of raising capital and have investors on the cap table?
First of all, in the very beginning, because we wanted to have people on board that we could trust and that we could learn from. And we didn't only want to have their money. By now, I have a couple of angel investors that are behind me that I can call at any time of the day to really ask them for feedback and ask them whether my way of thinking is the correct way. And it's really a sounding board and also a healthy way of having someone who plays devil's advocate, you know, people who keep you in check. Additionally to that, obviously, it allows you to build faster. It allows you to hire a couple of people and to try certain things out, right? Something we would not have been able to do if we didn't get this investment. So I would say that at our current stage, we are raising our seed round now, and we have like good traction. We have a good understanding of who our users are and how we can reach them. We have a very good understanding of what they want to see in the product in the future. But to get there, obviously, takes some time, right? And there also on our journey, there have been iterations with the product. We had one pivot with the product. And we had to readjust our strategy a little bit because with the first iteration of the product that we built, we found another very big problem that customers were facing. And we then had to take a step back and say, okay, before we built this part, we actually have to solve the other part. And this is then when the new version of Makersuite came about. Things like that are not possible when you're they are possible if you're completely bootstrapped, but they're very likely to go a lot slower, right?
Yeah.
For us, the learnings happened really fast, and the development then of everything happened also fairly quickly. Despite the fact that we are a very small team, we were able to focus 100% on Makersuite and didn't have to do like side gigs and consultancy jobs and or maybe take a part-time job on the side. So it really allowed us to double down on the development of the application. That's the reason why we do it, right? And that's also why we're raising a seed round now, is because we very strongly believe in the business. We very strongly believe in our vision, and raising capital allows us to get there faster. So yeah, that's the reason why we went that
absolutely.
route.
And so I think everything else is fair. The last bit that you mentioned, right, which is where if you're bootstrapping and if you have to pivot, while the software or the SaaS company that you're building at the time of pivot needs significantly more attention from you, you will be most likely forced to take up a side gig or freelancing or consulting. And I think that's it gives you freedom to run more experiments, even in some cases multiple experiments at once, to arrive at a solution that sort of works, and then you can double down, right? And so give us a stock of where Makersuite is today. Of course, you're raising your seed. Certain numbers you might not be able to share. Whatever you are able to share, give us a stock of where we are today in terms of how many users do we have, how many customers do we have, whatever numbers that you are able to share, just so that the people who are listening to this or watching this episode, they're able to get a sense of size and scale of where Makersuite is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently we have around 25,000 users on the platform that we have onboarded since the beginning of the year, since January 2025. We have around 5,000 of those paying. We are currently learning. We're currently looking in the user behavior, at the user data, and we are finding out that lots of the people that use the product, they are obviously there's a big chunk of creators, so people who create content for themselves. But then actually the biggest cohort of people that is using Makersuite is freelancers and agencies creating content for others and for their clients. Because they can leverage the efficiencies that Makersuite is creating the most. Because the more videos you're creating per month, the more efficiencies Makersuite is able to create for you. That is a very interesting learning that we have also made since the beginning of the year, and we continue to talk to users. I approximately talk to 5 to 10 users every day in very short 15-minute calls to really understand, okay, who are you? What are you trying to achieve? And how can we, as a team, deliver to really make your life a lot easier, right? And that is probably describes the stage that we are at the best. We are at the moment in the stage where we spend a lot of time on the phone, right? Talking to users, talking to prospects, talking to investors, and really learning everything there is about our company as well, right? So because there's so many different use cases Makersuite is used for. Some people use Makersuite in a way that we didn't intend it to be used, but they still do. And it's super interesting to hear what these use cases are, right? And it's interesting for us to find out whether there's multiple people that find this use case extremely useful or want to use the Makersuite in the same way. Then basically inform our own decision-making process for future features on all this customer feedback, right? And we collect the feedback. We have quantitative feedback. We look at all the user behavior in our back end. So we do everything data driven. So that's the quantitative part. But then the qualitative part is engaging with our users on our Discord channel. Every time people send us emails, ask us certain things in chat, that's also something. Yesterday, for example, we did a very long live webinar where people were able to ask us questions about the product in a live session. So we try to really gauge what the users want from these interactions, and then we consolidate everything in a massive spreadsheet, and then by looking at the spreadsheet and obviously having some methods to calculate how valuable certain features are, we then make our decisions on what we develop next.
That's it's interesting how you say that, because I think it was Chris Saka who is an early investor in Twitter, which is now X, who mentioned that. So someone asked them on TechCrunch Disrupt stage that how do you know when a company or a product has achieved EMF? And Chris said it's when people start to use your products in ways that you had never designed it for. It was never intended to do. And that's sort of how they identified PMF at Twitter in early days. That, hey, we built Twitter for some other use case, but now people are using it for entirely different thing. And I think we've built something of value here, something of note. And so that's interesting. But 5 to 10 customer calls a day. I mean, I'm also one of the co-founders at Client Joy, which we exited earlier this year in January of 25. We were serving about 13,000 odd customers in 90 odd countries, all of them agencies. And I was getting, I thought I was doing a good job because I was getting on 2 customer calls every week and 1 churned customer call every week, right? So 3 calls a week. But 5 to 10 a day, that's a new benchmark. I shall try to beat. But thank you. That's hard work, yeah. That's
I mean,
a lot of work.
it's very time intensive, and we try to keep these calls as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
But they're extremely valuable, right? Because without the feedback from our users, we are walking around in the dark. And I think especially in the beginning, it is important to talk to as many people as possible. Obviously, this I will not continue to do it like this, but for now, it is the right thing to do. And then in the future, we're obviously going to dial it down a little bit. But for this moment in time, it's in my opinion the only way forward.
No, that's absolutely essential, right? It tells you so much more. And one of the other things that it does is that it helps you validate all of your assumptions, right? So sort of kicks the founder out of staying in their bubble or confirmation bias or whatever it is that we can choose to call it. But that's interesting. 5,000 paying customers, 25,000 users, just since January 25, right? So that's extremely encouraging. What I wanted to understand is that, so when I went to the Maekersuite website, I found the website very, very mature, and platform as well. But one thing that I noted was the pricing. And so one of the questions that early stage SaaS founders have is how do you actually arrive at pricing? How do you identify, because there are no costs, like you cannot do cost plus margin because it doesn't work. And how do you actually identify? So then the only other option is value based pricing. And so how have you done it?
So we're definitely not the end of this journey, right? Finding the perfect pricing structure is, I think, it takes time. It takes months, if not years. We are playing around with pricing a lot and have been in the last couple of months. We actually, when we went live, we went into the market with much lower pricing tiers. We then found out that we are probably leaving a lot of value on the table for us. And then what we did was we took down the price the pricing page from our website, and we didn't allow anyone to subscribe manually, and they all had to go through personal calls with me.
Through you,
right? Yeah. So we then this is where we really started to talk to lots of people. We then went on calls. We tried to figure out what they wanted to do, and then we tested different prices, right? And we tested their willingness to pay, and that's how we ended up with the pricing structure that we currently have, right? So we simply asked people. We started asking people what their willingness to pay was, and then we adjusted our pricing. We looked at the churn numbers, and the first, I mean, obviously we started commercializing in January, so it's not a lot of data that we can look at. But, we looked at churn, we looked at customer satisfaction, and then this is the pricing structure that we ended up with for the moment. I'm not saying that this is now set in stone and will be the prices for the next 3 years. But we feel very comfortable that this is a really good value for money that Maekersuite is delivering. Yeah, and it's to be seen where the different subscription tiers go, the different pricing tiers go, and how we maybe include other pricing strategies in the future. So, for example, we've seen that some people reach their monthly limits in their respective tiers. So one thing that we're thinking about is maybe adding bundles, so you can top up your subscription every month without having to subscribe to a higher tier, things like that. So we are talking to people, we're listening closely to them, we ask them about their feedback, we look at churn and try to figure out why people churn, and if price was the reason, then obviously we want to make a very strong connection. Was the price point too high, or did you just not use the product regularly to justify that price point? What would have been a price point that maybe would have kept you on board for a little longer? So these are all things that we are currently figuring out. We are absolutely nowhere near the end of this process, but at the moment we feel comfortable with the pricing.
Awesome. And so HubSpot does about, I think, $2 billion a year in revenue, changes its pricing every 6 months. So I think there's no right answer to this, but it's always interesting to understand perspectives of different founders and how they are approaching it, right? So another thing that you mentioned early on was that you made a pivot, right? And so can you talk to us a little bit about the circumstances? I'm sure it would have been a difficult decision at that point of time. How did you identify that a pivot needs to be made? How, like, at what point do you say, okay, I think we need to reinvent what we set out to do? How do you do that?
So it was in fact a very hard decision. What was interesting, let me rephrase it. It wasn't really a hard decision. It was a decision that required commitment and decisiveness during the moment when the decision had to be made. Right after the decision was made, it felt like we made the right decision. And the reason for the pivot was that we simply, again, we watched our users use the product. We called them and we asked them why they're not using the product on a regular basis and what they are struggling with. After like the 50th call, we had the same answer over and over again. And then we said, okay, if this is the problem that everyone is facing, then we need to start earlier in the value creation process. And we need to help them solve this problem first before we can solve this other problem for them later. And that's what we then did. We basically took their feedback to heart, and there would not have been a sustainable road forward for us or way forward for us with the old product, simply because retention was not good enough. And yes, we could have gotten more users and I don't know, do certain things to maybe make it look better than it actually was, but it felt like we needed to change something substantially. and that was only achievable by refocusing and pivoting our attention to a different problem. And that's what we're doing now. And now retention and churn is actually in a good spot and
Yeah.
and manageable
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that we can build on.
Absolutely. And so one of the biggest mistakes. So my next question that I've written down is how do you figure out what to build next? And I know the answer to that. So it's no. I mean, it's one of those few interviews where I get to see that the founders have their priorities right, because 3 out of 5 questions that I've asked you, the answer in some way, shape, or form is just talking to customers. Right? And so it's talking back to back to enough customers, and it's not something new, right? It's something that a lot of successful founders have always advised first time founders. But one of the biggest mistakes still that I've seen a lot of other founders make, especially in their early journey, is that as soon as they're using amplitude and expander to figure out what parts of the product are being used, what parts are not being used, and then as soon as they identify that this piece of the product is not being used, their response to that is, okay, let's do a design change, let's introduce this into our onboarding sequence, or make it a part of our drip emails, and then stuff like that, and just pick up the phone, right, and just invite them for a call, a 15-minute call or something like that, and that's always meaningful. That brings me to my last question for today, and that is not actually my question. That's a question that Pierre from ICPs has left for you, and I'll also ask you for a question for our next guest. But the question that Pierre has asked is, at what point of time do you think that, okay, I've done enough user research, I should now start writing my first line of code? How do you differentiate that?
It's a I would honestly say you should never stop talking to your users, but obviously at some point you have to start
Right.
writing code, right?
Yeah.
So from what I've learned over the last couple of years, what I would and I'm because I'm also part of Antler, and I talk to a lot of Antler founders that are doing the program right now. And what I always tell them is, first of all, build a market first before you start building a product. So talk to people that you want to do something for. In our case, that was video creators. Talk to them and figure out what their problem is, and then
Mm-hmm.
offer a service that you can offer a very small service that you can do manually, and then try to automate certain steps of that service for yourself. And when you make revenue and when you're able to generate revenue from that, only then start building a product.
Hmm.
That's my advice. And I would, if I had to start all over again with a different business, that's how I would do it. I would
Ah.
not start building a single line of code before having a waiting list or paying customers
Mm-hmm.
for something that I'm trying to solve. And with Maekersuite, we did the same, right? In the beginning
Got it.
of Maekersuite, for the whole of last year, we
Mm-hmm.
had a manual service running in the background for our clients. And
Ah.
then I was the biggest customer of the Maekersuite platform, and I said, I need this to solve my problem. I need this to solve my problem. I need this to solve my problem. And this is how
Got
we
it.
then came up with the design of the first MVP. And
Got it.
because it was useful for me, it then suddenly also became useful to others.
Got
Um,
it.
so that would be my advice. Really start as simple as possible, and then very like build your product in small increments.
Mm-hmm.
I've obviously also seen it the other way around. I've seen people that have raised 2 million on a pitch deck, and they just
Yeah.
built and
Yeah.
then launched with a big bang, and
Yeah.
then tried solving the problems later on. But
Yeah.
this is not the reality for
Yeah.
first time founders. So
Yeah.
that would be my advice.
Awesome, man. Thank you. And so this, by the way, I should also mention our first guest, first ever episode that we did, was with this founder called Josiah Code, who's building a social media content generator using AI called MyMarket. And he had a fairly similar answer to a different question, but fairly similar answer where he said software is a sunken cost, right? And so don't start writing code unless you're able to sell it as a service first. So sell it as
Yeah.
a service first, and then as and when it becomes extremely painful for you to offer this service, as and when you generate more and more demand, try and automate it. And then once you automated it enough, bundle it into a product, and then lower the cost of the service by 5x or 7x or whatever it makes sense to, and then just offer it as a product. And so thank you for sharing that. What's by the way your question for the next guest that we have? What's the question that you're currently wrestling with?
Yeah, absolutely. So my question would be, what are the top 3 distribution channels
Mm-hmm.
that you would are tackling as a founder with your
Ah,
startup?
interesting.
Because I think it's the product is one side, building the
Yeah,
product, but distribution
yeah,
is crucial for
yeah,
the success of your business. I would say that it's probably equally as important as the product
yeah.
side.
I can
Finding
sense that you
finding a
wanted
good
to say
way.
more important.
Yeah.
And I would have agreed more to that statement. That distribution's a little more important than product, because like in my limited experience, I've seen average products do extremely well, generate greater financial outcomes, value creation outcomes, with better distribution than amazingly great products.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
like a good product is a necessary condition, right? It's not a sufficient one.
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
That's sort of where we are. But that's interesting, right? So top 3 distribution channels is something that I will ask. And Philip, that brings us to the end of this episode. I would like to thank you for joining in on this conversation, and everyone who joined in to listen to this or to view this wherever it was, whether it was YouTube or Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You'll be able to find the link to Maekersuite.com in the description as well. If you are looking to use a powerful platform that can help you craft compelling video storylines using data and AI, you should check them out as well. Thank you everyone for joining in. Until next time.
Thank you. Pleasure.